The sound of a gunshot cracked through the morning air, and Caleb Sullivan was wide awake. His hand, calloused from years of ranch work and war, found the cold metal of the rifle he kept by his bed. He didn't even need to think. His body remembered. It always remembered. Another shot rang out. This one was closer, undeniably real. Caleb moved like a ghost through his own cabin, his feet silent on the floorboards. The Army had taught him how to move, how to fight, how to kill. He'd come to this remote corner of Montana to forget all that. But the past has a funny way of finding you. He paused at the front door, listening. The wind howled, a familiar Montana song promising more snow. But beneath the wind, he heard something else. A woman's voice, sharp and angry. He eased the door open just a crack, and his blood ran cold. There on his porch stood Eleanor Wilson. Her arms were spread wide, shielding the door to the room where her children slept. Her auburn hair was a storm of its own in the wind, but she stood tall. She didn't waver, not even with a pistol aimed directly at her heart. "I'm telling you, I'm not Victoria." Eleanor's voice was clear and steady, cutting through the frigid air. The woman holding the gun stood at the bottom of the steps. She looked like Eleanor, a harder, colder version, her face twisted by rage. "Don't play games with me," the woman snarled. "Where's the money? We had a deal." Eleanor's shoulders went back. "My name is Eleanor Wilson. I've never been to Helena, and I have never robbed anything in my life." The woman laughed, a sound as cold and cruel as the wind. "Still playing the grieving widow. That act might have worked on those fools at the bank, but I know better." Caleb watched as the woman's finger tightened on the trigger. He had seconds, maybe less, and in that frozen moment, his mind flashed back to how this whole nightmare had begun, just 3 days earlier. 3 days earlier, the sun was setting over Pinewood Ranch, painting the hills in gold and red. But dark clouds were gathering in the north. The first big storm of the season was coming. Caleb Sullivan stood by the fence watching the dirt road. He was waiting for a woman, a mail-order bride named Rebecca Mitchell. "She's late," his old ranch hand, Samuel Eagleton, grumbled from the porch. Samuel was 68, slow-moving but sharp-eyed. He missed nothing. "Stage could be delayed," Caleb said, his eyes still fixed on the horizon. "Weather's turning." He'd read Rebecca's letters until the paper was soft. A 30-year-old widow from Boston, no children, practical. She understood his offer wasn't about romance. It was about partnership, a chance to build a life far from the sorrows of the past, his past and hers. He had shaved that morning, the razor tracing the long, thin scar that ran down his left cheek, a souvenir from an Apache blade that had almost ended his life. He wore his only good shirt, a faded blue cotton that Samuel claimed made him look almost civilized. At 42, Caleb knew what he was, a hard man, weathered by the sun and a life that hadn't been kind. He wasn't offering poetry. He was offering a roof that didn't leak and a promise of protection. In their letters, that had seemed like enough. Then he saw it, a puff of dust on the horizon. "Reckon that's her," Samuel said, getting to his feet. "Best put on your welcoming face, such as it is." Caleb's palms were suddenly damp. He'd faced down raiders and survived killer blizzards, but the thought of this woman from Boston made his stomach twist into knots. What if the letters were a lie? The stagecoach crested the rise, the horses straining against the rutted road. Snowflakes had started to fall, big wet flakes that promised a whole lot more to come. The coach ground to a halt in front of the ranch house. Caleb stepped forward, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Pinewood Ranch," the driver called out. "Last stop before this weather turns ugly." The door swung open. A woman stepped out. She was slender, dressed in a dusty blue traveling dress. But her hair wasn't the blonde he'd been expecting. It was a rich auburn, and her eyes weren't blue. They were a clear, startling gray. Before he could even process the mistake, a boy of about 16 climbed down after her. Then a girl, maybe 2 years younger. Then 2 identical twin boys, who looked to be around 8. Finally, the woman turned back, and the driver handed her a small child, a little girl with golden hair, who buried her face in her mother's neck. Caleb stood there, frozen. This wasn't one woman. It was 6 people. A mother and 5 children, all of them looking at him with exhausted, wary eyes. This was not Rebecca Mitchell. The woman walked toward him, her steps uncertain but her gaze firm. "Mr. Sullivan?" she asked, her voice soft but clear. He could only nod. "I'm Eleanor Wilson," she said, shifting the small child in her arms. "I believe you were expecting someone else." Samuel came to stand beside him, his face a mask of surprise. "Rebecca Mitchell," Caleb finally managed to say. "I was expecting Rebecca Mitchell." Eleanor nodded, her expression apologetic. "I met Miss Mitchell at the Denver station." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded, torn piece of newspaper. It was his advertisement. "She gave me this." Caleb took the paper, his mind reeling. "Miss Mitchell had a change of heart," Eleanor explained, her voice quiet. "She met a timber merchant bound for Oregon." The oldest boy stepped closer to his mother, his jaw set. "We used nearly everything we had to get here," he said, his voice trying for a man's authority. "Mother said you were looking for help." "Noah," Eleanor said gently, but there was pride in her eyes. A bitter wind swept across the yard. The little girl whimpered and the twin boys huddled together, their faces pinched with cold. "Storm's coming in fast," Samuel said, his eyes on the darkening sky. "Gonna be the first big one of the season." Caleb felt 6 pairs of eyes on him, 6 strangers. This wasn't the deal. He had wanted a wife, a partner, not a ready-made family with 5 mouths to feed, and who knew what other troubles they were carrying. But he looked at their tired, travel-worn faces. He saw the quiet dignity in Eleanor's posture as she stood against the wind, protecting her children. And he couldn't do it. He couldn't turn them away, not with a blizzard bearing down on them. "You can stay," he said, his voice gruffer than he intended. "Until the weather clears, there's room in the house." Relief washed over Eleanor's face, so clear and profound, it was like the sun breaking through the clouds. "We won't be a burden, Mr. Sullivan. We can work for our keep." The little girl in her arms let out a deep, rattling cough. "Sophie's been fighting a cold since Denver," Eleanor explained, her brow creased with worry. Samuel stepped forward, his usual gruffness gone. "Let's get you folks inside where it's warm. Storm like this, you wouldn't make it halfway back to town anyway." As the family followed Samuel toward the house, Eleanor paused in front of Caleb. "Thank you," she said, her gray eyes meeting his. "I know this isn't what you agreed to." He just nodded, unsure what to say. This woman was either the bravest person he'd ever met or the most desperate. Maybe both. As he followed them inside, the snow began to fall in earnest, blanketing the world in a silent, swirling white. And Caleb had the sinking feeling that this storm, and the trouble it brought with it, was only just beginning. His cabin, which had always felt spacious enough for 2 men, suddenly felt impossibly small. The main room, with its stone fireplace and sturdy furniture, was filled with the unfamiliar sounds of children's voices and the rustle of a woman's skirts. After years of silence, the noise was deafening. Samuel showed Eleanor and her daughters to the spare room, while the boys were given the small study. Caleb retreated to the kitchen, listening. He heard childish questions and Eleanor's soft, patient answers. The floorboards creaked under feet that didn't belong. "Never thought I'd see the day," Samuel murmured, joining him at the stove. 6 extra people under this roof. It's a change." "Not what I bargained for," Caleb grunted, staring out the window as the snow piled up. "Life rarely gives us what we bargain for," Samuel said, his eyes twinkling. "Sometimes it gives us what we need instead." Before Caleb could argue, Eleanor appeared in the doorway. She'd taken off her shawl and rolled up her sleeves. Her hair was pinned back, revealing the graceful line of her neck. "If I may," she said, "I'd like to prepare supper. It's the least I can do." Caleb started to refuse, but Samuel spoke first. "Kitchen's all yours, ma'am. Pantry's through there. Plenty of supplies." Eleanor moved with a quiet efficiency that surprised Caleb. In minutes, she transformed from a weary traveler into a capable homemaker. She found ingredients, started a stew, and even began baking bread. The oldest girl, Emma, helped set the table with Caleb's mismatched plates. The house began to smell like a home. Dinner was a strange affair. Caleb was used to silence, broken only by Samuel's occasional comments. Now the table was alive with the quiet energy of the Wilson children. The twins, Oliver and Ethan, whispered secrets. Emma helped her little sister Sophie, whose cough had eased in the warmth. The oldest boy, Noah, ate in silence, but his eyes were constantly on Caleb, sizing him up. He had his mother's auburn hair, but a strong jaw and broad shoulders that hinted at the man he would soon become. He sat between Caleb and his family, a silent protector. Eleanor asked polite questions about the ranch, but she skillfully avoided any questions about herself. Caleb noticed, but he didn't push. Her secrets were her own, as long as she and her family were gone once the snow stopped. After the meal, as Eleanor and Emma cleared the table, little Sophie tugged on her mother's dress. "Story time, Mama?" Eleanor smiled, her tired face softening as she looked at her daughter. She gathered the little girl into her arms. "Thank you again, Mr. Sullivan," she said, her eyes meeting Caleb's for a brief moment before she carried Sophie off to bed, the twins trailing behind her. Noah stayed behind, insisting on helping Emma with the dishes. It was clear he saw himself as the man of the family now. Caleb stepped out onto the porch, needing the cold air. The snow was coming down thick and fast, already several inches deep. It was official. They were snowed in. The Wilson family wasn't going anywhere for days. The thought made him uneasy in a way he couldn't name. Samuel joined him, lighting his pipe. "Gonna be a bad one," the old man said. "Might be stuck here for a week." Caleb just nodded, his breath a white cloud in the frigid air. "That boy Noah," Samuel said thoughtfully. "He reminds me of someone. Can't quite put my finger on it." Caleb had noticed it too, something in the set of the boy's jaw, a watchfulness in his eyes. It was familiar. Samuel knocked out his pipe. "Well, I'm turning in. Tomorrow's going to come early, snow or no snow." Caleb stayed on the porch until the cold drove him inside. The house was quiet now. As he banked the fire for the night, he saw a small leather bag left by a chair. It must belong to the Wilsons. He picked it up to set it aside, and something fell out. A small framed photograph. He bent to retrieve it. As he straightened, the firelight caught the image. It was a man in a cavalry uniform, standing proud and tall, and Caleb's breath caught in his throat. He knew that face. He hadn't seen it in a decade, but he would never forget it. Lieutenant Robert Wilson. The memories hit him like a physical blow. Fort Mackenzie, a young lieutenant pulling him to safety during a Blackfoot ambush. The same lieutenant who stood beside him at the Battle of Whispering Creek. The battle where Caleb's mistake had cost 5 good men their lives. The room suddenly felt airless. Eleanor Wilson wasn't just some random widow. She was Robert Wilson's widow. And those children sleeping down the hall were Robert Wilson's children. They were all under his roof, the roof of the man responsible for their father's greatest failure. He carefully put the photograph back in the bag, his mind racing. Was this a coincidence, or was it something else entirely? Did Eleanor know who he was? Did she know about Whispering Creek? He went to the window, staring out at the snow-covered world. The storm had broken for a moment, and the moon cast long, eerie shadows across the white landscape. It was beautiful and treacherous, just like the past. And now the past was sleeping in his spare bedroom. Sleep was not going to come easy that night. The next morning the world was a blinding white. Sunlight reflected off a thick blanket of fresh snow. Caleb was up before dawn, but Samuel was already in the kitchen, stoking the fire. "Must be 18 inches at least," the old man said, "and still coming down." Caleb poured a coffee, his mind still tangled in the revelation of the night before. His sleep had been haunted by the faces of dead soldiers and the ghost of Robert Wilson. Just then, Noah appeared in the doorway, already dressed. "Mother says to ask if we can help with chores," the boy said, his tone formal. "We're used to farm work." Caleb hesitated for a second, then nodded. "Livestock needs tending. You can come with me." Outside, the snow was halfway up his calves. He led the way to the barn, breaking a trail for the boy. Inside, the horses nickered, their warm breath pluming in the cold air. Noah moved with a quiet confidence, mimicking Caleb's actions, feeding and watering the animals. He worked without complaint, and it was clear he knew his way around a barn. "You've done this before," Caleb observed. Noah patted a mare's neck. "We had a small farm near Kansas City. Before," his face shuddered, "before the bank took it, after Father died. It was the first real piece of information any of them had offered. Your father, Caleb began, choosing his words carefully. He was military. A flash of pride crossed Noah's face. Cavalry, Lieutenant Robert Wilson. He served at Fort McKenzie. Was he a good man? Caleb had to ask. The best, Noah said without a flicker of doubt. He taught me everything. About horses, about being a man. His voice caught and he turned away, fussing with a bridle that didn't need fussing with. Caleb let him have the moment. He moved to a small paddock at the back of the barn. Inside was a wild bay stallion he'd found a few weeks back, its leg caught in a ravine. The horse was healing, but it was still mean, pinning its ears and snorting whenever Caleb got close. That's a Mustang, Noah said, his eyes wide with interest. A real wild one, Caleb confirmed. Too fine an animal to let die, but too ornery to be grateful. Noah studied the horse. Father always said the wildest horses make the most loyal mounts if you can earn their trust. The words hit Caleb like a punch to the gut. They were the exact words Robert had said to him years ago at Fort McKenzie. The past was closing in on him from all sides. The barn door creaked open, and Eleanor stood there, wrapped in a heavy shawl. There you are, she said, her cheeks flushed from the cold. Breakfast is ready. She looked at Caleb. I hope Noah has been helpful. He knows his way around horses, Caleb replied. Good workers are never a burden. A small, grateful smile touched her lips. As Noah went to join his mother, the wild stallion did something strange. It walked to the fence and stretched its neck toward the boy. Noah paused and slowly held out his hand. The horse sniffed it cautiously. Eleanor watched, a mix of pride and worry on her face. Noah has his father's way with horses, she said softly to Caleb. Robert could gentle any Mustang with just his voice. It was the first time she'd mentioned her husband's name to him. He searched her face, looking for any sign that she knew who he was, that she knew his connection to Robert. But he saw nothing but a widow's sad memory. Your husband, Caleb said carefully. How long has he been gone? A shadow fell over her face. 8 months. A fever took him. Too quickly. She squared her shoulders. We should go in. The snow is starting again. She was right. The brief lull was over. The real storm was just getting started. As they walked back to the house, Caleb found himself watching Eleanor. He tried to reconcile the composed, capable woman beside him with the memory of the young lieutenant he had admired, and ultimately failed. Did she know what he had done? Did she know that his mistake at Whispering Creek had haunted her husband for the rest of his life? If she did, she hid it well. And if she didn't, Caleb wasn't sure which was worse. They were trapped together in the heart of a blizzard, surrounded by secrets that were as cold and dangerous as the storm itself. The house settled into a tense quiet as the blizzard raged outside. The Wilson children were surprisingly well behaved, but the cabin felt crowded, charged with unspoken questions. Sophie's cough grew worse, a harsh, rattling sound that echoed through the rooms. Caleb felt like a stranger in his own home. He tried to work on his ranch accounts, but the numbers blurred. All he could see was Robert Wilson's face in that photograph. By mid-afternoon, the storm was a full-blown blizzard. The wind shrieked, and the snow fell so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Storm's getting worse, Samuel announced, pacing by the window. Going to be a bad one. A real bad one. Eleanor looked up from her mending, her needle still. How long do these storms usually last? Could be a day, could be a week, Samuel said, scratching his beard. Hard to say. A flicker of fear crossed Eleanor's face before she masked it. Just then, Sophie let out another deep, troubling cough. Eleanor touched the child's forehead. She's burning up, she murmured, her voice tight with worry. There's willow bark in the medicine cabinet, Caleb found himself saying. It's good for fever. Eleanor's eyes met his, full of surprise and gratitude. Thank you. As Caleb went to get the remedy, he heard Oliver, one of the twins, shout from the front window. Someone's coming! There's a horse! Caleb and Samuel rushed to the window. Through the swirling white, they could see a dark shape, a horse and rider, struggling toward the house. Only a fool or a desperate man would be out in this, Samuel muttered. Or both, Caleb said, grabbing his heavy coat. He buckled on his gun belt, out of pure habit. He stepped out into the storm. The wind was a solid wall, driving ice and snow into his face. He could just make out the rider, hunched low over his horse's neck. As Caleb got closer, the rider looked up, and Caleb's heart stopped. It was a face he hadn't seen in years, but one he recognized instantly. Gabriel Hayes, a former sergeant from his old unit, and now he was wearing the badge of a U.S. Marshal. "Sullivan!" Gabriel yelled over the wind, relief clear in his voice. "Thought I'd missed the turn in this devil's brew." Caleb led him to the barn. Once inside, out of the wind, Gabriel dismounted, his movements stiff with cold. "You're a long way from anywhere, Hayes," Caleb said. "Must be important." Gabriel nodded, his face grim. "Official business. I'm tracking a gang. Robbed the bank in Helena 5 days ago." He paused, his eyes locking on Caleb's. "They took over $2,000, shot a teller." Caleb felt a prickle of ice crawl up his spine, and it had nothing to do with the cold. "There were 4 men," Gabriel continued, "and a woman, and the woman Sullivan. That's what brings me to your door." "How so?" Caleb asked, though he already had a terrible feeling he knew the answer. Gabriel reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a wanted poster. "She gave her name as Eleanor Wilson," he said, "described herself as a widow with children, used them as cover to scout the bank." Caleb's fingers felt numb as he unfolded the paper. It was a crude drawing, but with a little imagination, it could have been the woman sleeping in his spare room. "Word in town was you were expecting a mail-order bride," Gabriel said, his gaze sharp. "I thought I'd check and see if she showed up. See if she matches our suspect." Caleb's mind was a whirlwind. Eleanor? A bank robber? A killer? It seemed impossible. The gentle mother tending to her sick child. But she had arrived out of nowhere. Her story about Rebecca Mitchell was convenient. Too convenient. She had been vague about her past. "Sullivan," Gabriel pressed, "has your bride arrived?" He had to make a choice. Right then, right there. And he made it. "No," he said, his voice firm. "Stage driver said she changed her mind in Denver." Gabriel raised an eyebrow, but he didn't argue. "Well," he said, "mind if I warm up a bit? This storm's getting worse." "You won't make it back to your men today," Caleb said. "You'd better stay the night." The lie sat heavy in his gut, but he couldn't just hand her over. Not yet. Not until he knew the truth. They trudged back to the house. When they stepped inside, Eleanor looked up from where she sat with Sophie. Her eyes widened just slightly when she saw the stranger with the badge pinned to his coat. "Marshal Gabriel Hayes," Caleb announced, his voice carefully casual. "Caught in the storm. He'll be staying the night." If Eleanor recognized the name, if the sight of a lawman terrified her, she gave no sign. "Welcome, Marshal," she said, her voice calm and polite. Caleb introduced her and the children as a family stranded by the storm on their way to Helena. Another lie, another weight on his conscience. Gabriel's face was unreadable. Later, as Samuel and Gabriel talked by the fire, Caleb caught Eleanor's eye. He tilted his head toward the kitchen. She understood. In the privacy of the kitchen, she turned to him, her eyes wary. "Is something wrong?" He didn't waste any time. "Marshal Hayes is hunting a gang of bank robbers," he said, his voice low. "A woman was with them. She was using the name Eleanor Wilson." The color drained from her face. She gripped the edge of the table for support. "What?" "The woman involved," Caleb pressed, "called herself Eleanor Wilson, said she was a widow with children." Eleanor's eyes, wide with shock, suddenly darkened with a terrible understanding. "And you believe I could be her?" "I don't know what to believe," Caleb admitted. "You show up here out of the blue with a story I can't prove. At the exact same time, a criminal with your name is being hunted in this very area." Eleanor straightened up, her dignity a shield against his suspicion. "Mr. Sullivan, I have never been to Helena. I would never, ever place my children in such danger." Her voice trembled, but her gaze was unwavering. "I am exactly who I say I am." There was something in her eyes, a fierce honesty that cut through his doubt. But he'd been wrong about people before. Dead wrong. "Hayes will want to question you," he said. "I told him you were traveling to Helena, not from it. I didn't mention your name was Wilson." Surprise flickered across her face. You lied for me? Why?" Caleb looked away. "Your children don't deserve to be caught in the middle of this," he said gruffly. A small, trembling smile touched her lips. Thank you. Just keep your story simple, he warned. If you are who you say you are, you have nothing to fear. And if he doesn't believe me? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. He met her eyes. Then we'll deal with that when it comes. I don't abandon people under my roof, Mrs. Wilson. The words surprised him as much as they did her. But he knew they were true. Whatever she was, whatever she'd done, he wouldn't throw her and her 5 children out into the storm. Not for the wolves and not for the law. A debt was a debt, and he owed Robert Wilson more than he could ever repay. Just then, Sophie's harsh cough echoed from the other room, followed by a frightened cry for her mother. Eleanor was gone in an instant, the mother overriding the woman. Caleb stayed in the kitchen, his world turned upside down. He had lied to a federal marshal, he was harboring a potential fugitive, and he was caught in a web of secrets that stretched all the way back to a bloody creek bed and a mistake that had cost 5 men their lives. Outside, the storm howled, and inside, trapped with a lawman, a mysterious widow, and the ghosts of his past, Caleb knew this was just the beginning. The real storm was about to break. Dinner that night was thick with tension. The Marshal, Gabriel Hayes, was polite, but his eyes were constantly on Eleanor, watching, assessing. Eleanor, for her part, was a picture of calm composure, answering his casual questions about her journey with just enough detail to be believable. The children were quiet, sensing the danger in the air. Only little Sophie, feverish and coughing, seemed unaware of the drama swirling around her. Your little one sounds poorly, Gabriel observed, as Sophie was seized by another coughing fit. My sister's boy had a cough like that, turned into lung fever. Eleanor's face tightened with worry. As the evening wore on, the storm grew even more violent. After Eleanor had put the children to bed, Gabriel turned to Caleb. Quite a coincidence, he said, swirling a bit of whiskey Samuel had poured for him. You waiting for a bride who doesn't show, and this family just happens to turn up. The frontier's full of coincidences, Caleb said, his face a mask. Before Gabriel could press him further, Noah appeared in the doorway. Mr. Sullivan, he said formally, may I check on the horses? I'm worried about that stallion in this cold. Caleb knew it was an excuse. The boy wanted to talk. Good idea, he said, getting up. I'll come with you. The wind nearly tore the barn door from its hinges. Inside, the horses were restless. As soon as the door was shut, Noah turned to him. That Marshal, he said, his young voice shaking with barely controlled fear. He's looking for my mother, isn't he? I heard what you said in the kitchen. Someone used her name. There was no point in lying to the boy. Yes, Caleb admitted, but I don't believe she's involved. Noah's shoulders sagged with relief. She's not. But that won't stop him from taking her, will it? Lawmen don't always care about the truth. The bitterness in his voice was chilling. Will you help us? Noah asked, his eyes pleading. If he tries to take her? Caleb looked at the boy, who was trying so hard to be a man. He thought of Robert Wilson. He thought of the debt he owed. Your mother is under my roof, he said, his voice low and firm. I won't let any harm come to her without cause. Noah seemed to see the truth in his eyes, and he nodded. My father would have done the same, he said quietly. Then he paused. Mr. Sullivan, did you ever serve at Fort McKenzie? The question hit Caleb like a stray bullet. I did, he said, as a scout. My father spoke of his time there, Noah said, his expression unreadable in the lantern light. We should get back. When they returned to the house, the marshal had turned in. Caleb was left alone with Samuel by the dying fire. That's a sharp lad, Samuel observed. Sees more than he lets on. He looked at Caleb. You really think the mother's innocent? Yes, Caleb said, surprised by his own certainty. I do. Known her less than 2 days, Samuel pointed out. I know, Caleb said. It doesn't make sense. Doesn't have to, Samuel replied gently. Some things you just know. Deep down. Left alone, Caleb stared into the embers. He'd been certain once before, at Whispering Creek, and that certainty had gotten 5 men killed. Was he making the same mistake again, trusting his gut when all the evidence pointed the other way? He rose, weary to the bone. As he passed the room where Eleanor and her daughter slept, He saw through the slightly open door that she was sitting by Sophie's bed, her hand on the child's forehead. The sight of her quiet vigil stirred something in him, a protective instinct he thought had died long ago. He knew then, with a certainty that chilled him and warmed him at the same time, that no matter what happened when the sun came up, he would not let Gabriel Hayes take her. The debt he owed Robert Wilson would be paid, one way or another. In the dead of night, Caleb woke to the sound of Sophie's coughing, followed by Eleanor's soft, soothing voice. The storm was still shrieking outside. Sleep was impossible. He found her in the main room, wrapped in a shawl, her hair loose around her shoulders. In the dim firelight, she looked younger, more vulnerable, and achingly beautiful. "I'm sorry if she woke you," Eleanor said, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "Her fever's worse." "Sit," he said, his own voice rough. "I'll make tea." They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling fire and the howling wind. "You're kind," she murmured, "despite your best efforts to appear otherwise." He grunted. "Practical, can't sleep with all that coughing." She smiled, a small, tired smile that reached her eyes. "Like lying to a federal marshal. Very practical." He found himself telling her the truth, or part of it. "I knew your husband," he said, "at Fort McKenzie." Her eyes widened. "You knew Robert?" "We served together," he said. "He was a good officer." "Yes, he was," she said, her voice soft with memory. "He spoke of the men he served with there. He said they were the finest he'd ever known." She studied him. "He never mentioned you by name, I don't think." Caleb felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. She didn't connect him to Whispering Creek, but Robert had never thought him important enough to mention to his wife. "It was a long time ago," he said. "People change," she replied, her gaze steady. "Sometimes adversity shapes us into something stronger." She stood to leave to check on Sophie again. "Thank you for the tea, Mr. Sullivan." As she turned to go, a violent gust of wind rattled the entire cabin. "You're safe here," he said, the words coming out before he could stop them. She turned back, and in the firelight, her eyes met his. A silent understanding passed between them, something stronger than words. "I believe you," she said, and then she was gone. Caleb stared into the fire. A decision had settled in his heart, solid and heavy as stone. Eleanor Wilson and her children were under his protection. Whatever Gabriel Hayes did, whatever the truth was, he would not let them be taken. The debt would be paid. The next morning, the storm was even worse. The world outside was a churning vortex of white. Caleb found Gabriel in the kitchen, staring out the window. "Roads will be impassable for days," the marshal said, "meaning I'm stuck here. With your guests." His eyes were sharp. "Convenient timing for someone with something to hide." "Or inconvenient for innocent travelers," Caleb shot back. "Fair enough," Gabriel conceded. "Still, I'd like to ask Mrs. Wilson a few questions, just to satisfy my curiosity." Before he could, Noah appeared. "Mother's with Sophie. The fever broke, but the cough's no better." Just then Samuel came in. "Miller's Creek," he said to Gabriel, his face grim. "That creek can flood in a storm like this. Your men." Gabriel's face went pale. "They're camped right by the water. 2 deputies. Good men, but young. They've never seen a Montana blizzard." There was no choice. They had to go. The ride to Miller's Creek was a journey into a frozen hell. The wind tore at them, and the snow was so thick they could barely see their horses' heads. "Sullivan!" Gabriel yelled over the wind. "I've known you for 15 years. Level with me. That woman back there, she's Robert Wilson's widow, isn't she?" Caleb's heart hammered. He couldn't lie about this. "She is." "And you didn't think that was relevant?" Gabriel demanded. Before Caleb could answer, they heard it. A faint cry for help, nearly swallowed by the storm. They found the deputies' camp destroyed. One of them, a young man named Mercer, was frantically digging in a snowdrift. "It's Chapman!" he cried, his face wild with fear. "He fell through the ice. I pulled him out, but he's freezing to death." They found Chapman huddled in the remains of a tent, his lips blue, his body shaking violently. "Hypothermia," Caleb said grimly. "We need to get him back to the ranch, now." The journey back was a nightmare. Chapman was a dead weight, barely conscious. By the time they saw the faint light of the ranch house, Caleb's own hands and feet were numb stumps. When they stumbled inside, Eleanor took charge. She didn't hesitate. She didn't ask questions. She saw a man in need, and she went to work, her voice calm and steady, directing everyone, issuing orders. She moved with a competence that stunned Gabriel into silence. Later, as Chapman rested by the fire, his condition stable but still serious, Gabriel looked at Eleanor with new respect. "You've done this before." "A blizzard near Fort McKenzie," she said. "My husband's unit rescued a stranded family. I learned a lot from the post surgeon." Gabriel then turned his sharp gaze on her. "Speaking of your husband," he said casually, "he was decorated for bravery, as I recall, at the Battle of Whispering Creek." The name hit the room like a physical blow. The air crackled with tension. Caleb saw Eleanor's eyes dart between him and the marshal, sensing the hidden meaning, the dangerous undercurrent. "Robert rarely spoke of that day," she said, her voice cautious. "He said some victories come at too high a price." "A wise perspective," Gabriel said, his eyes never leaving her face. Caleb couldn't take it anymore. He stood up, knocking his chair back. "Chapman needs watching. We should set up a rotation." The subject was changed, but the damage was done. The ghost of Whispering Creek was no longer just haunting Caleb. It was in the room with all of them now, and it was hungry for the truth. Later that night, as the house groaned under the weight of the storm, Noah found Caleb alone. The boy's face was pale, his eyes wide with a fear that went beyond the blizzard. "The marshal," he whispered, "he keeps asking about my father, about Whispering Creek." He took a deep breath. "Were you there, Mr. Sullivan? Is that how you knew him?" Caleb looked into the boy's earnest face, a mirror of his father's, and he couldn't lie. "I was there," he said, his voice a rasp. "It was a bad day, one of the worst. Was my father a hero?" "He saved lives that day," Caleb said, the words tasting like ash, "including mine. Whatever else happened, you remember that." Noah nodded, some of the tension leaving his young shoulders. "Thank you." He hesitated. "There's something else. Something my father gave me." Before he could explain, Eleanor appeared in the doorway. "Noah, the twins need more firewood." Her eyes moved between them, sensing the gravity of their conversation. Noah gave Caleb a look, a silent promise to continue later, and left. "He wasn't asking about horses, was he?" Eleanor asked, her gaze sharp. "No," Caleb admitted. "He was asking about Whispering Creek." Her composure, so solid until now, finally cracked. "And what did you tell him?" "That his father saved my life." She studied his face, trying to read the story he was hiding. "What happened at Whispering Creek, Mr. Sullivan? What aren't you telling me?" The question hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. But before he could answer, a crash and a child's cry came from the main room. They rushed in to find Sophie standing amid the shards of a broken lamp, tears streaming down her face. The moment was broken. The question was left unanswered. But Caleb knew it was only a matter of time. The truth of Whispering Creek, the truth of what he had done, was a debt that was finally coming due. In the darkest hour of the night, during his watch over the feverish Deputy Chapman, Noah slipped into the room. He was holding a folded, yellowed piece of paper. "My father gave this to me before he died," the boy whispered, his eyes wide in the dim lantern light. "He told me to open it only if we were ever in real trouble." Caleb took the letter. His hands trembled as he unfolded it. It was from Robert Wilson. "To whom it may concern," it began. "I direct this letter to Caleb Sullivan, formerly of Fort McKenzie. Sullivan and I share a history that binds us more surely than blood. He knows the debt between us, forged at Whispering Creek, and I trust his honor to fulfill that obligation." The letter went on, entrusting his family's safety to Caleb. It spoke of deceptions and threats, of a danger Robert had foreseen but couldn't name. "Know that Caleb Sullivan is a man of integrity," Robert had written to his wife, "despite what the official record may suggest about the events at Whispering Creek. Trust him with your life and the lives of our children, as I would." The weight of the words crushed Caleb. Robert had known he was dying. He had known his family would be in danger, and he had sent them here, to him, the man whose mistake had nearly gotten him killed. "What does it mean?" Noah asked. Why would Father think we'd need your protection? I'm not sure, Caleb lied, his mind reeling. Just then, Eleanor appeared in the doorway. I thought I heard voices. Her eyes went from the letter in Caleb's hand to the look on his face. What is it? There were no more lies to tell. He told her everything, about Whispering Creek, about his mistake, his failure as a scout, about the ambush that had killed 5 men. I missed the signs, he confessed, the words tearing from his throat. Their deaths are on my conscience. She listened, her face unreadable in the firelight. Robert protected you, she said, her voice barely a whisper. In his report, he saved your career. He did, Caleb said, unable to meet her eyes. She touched his arm, a light, fleeting gesture that sent a jolt through him. That sounds like Robert, she said softly. He believed in second chances. He must have seen something in you worth saving, Mr. Sullivan. Her forgiveness was more painful than any accusation could have been. Eleanor, he said, using her name for the first time. There's something else. But he never got to finish. A rifle shot cracked through the night, splintering the silence. Then another, closer this time. Someone was out there, in the storm. Caleb moved to the window. In the distance, he saw a bobbing lantern, cutting through the swirling snow, heading straight for the ranch house. Wake Gabriel, he ordered, grabbing his gun belt. Keep the children away from the windows. Gabriel appeared at his side, his own gun drawn. How many? At least 3, Caleb said. A woman's voice cut through the howl of the wind, sharp and cold. Sullivan, we know you're harboring Victoria Blackwood. Send her out, and the rest of you can live. Victoria Blackwood, the name on the wanted poster. But the marshal had said the name was Eleanor Wilson. This is Federal Marshal Gabriel Hayes, Gabriel shouted. Lower your weapons. A hail of gunfire was the only answer. Bullets slammed into the walls of the cabin. Glass shattered. They're not here to talk, Gabriel said grimly. Then a new sound. A crash from the back of the house. Noah appeared, his face white. They're breaking in through the kitchen. They were surrounded, pinned down, outnumbered, and they had women and children to protect. Caleb and Gabriel split up, Caleb heading for the kitchen. He got there just as Samuel fired a warning shot through the splintered back door. There's no Victoria Blackwood here, Caleb yelled. Liar! A voice snarled back, followed by another volley of shots. As bullets flew, Eleanor appeared, her face a mask of terror. The children are in the root cellar, she said, her voice trembling. But Sophie is missing. Caleb's blood ran cold. The little girl, lost somewhere in the house, with bullets flying through the air. He had to find her. He moved through the chaotic house, calling her name. The main room was a war zone. Gabriel was exchanging fire with at least 4 men who had broken in through the front. Then Caleb heard it, a small whimper coming from the direction of the barn. He found her there, huddled by the wild stallion stall, her small body shaking with fear. Sophie, he said, relief washing over him. Let's get you back inside. But she wasn't looking at him. She was staring past him, at the main barn door. Caleb turned. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, a rifle aimed directly at his chest. Hello, Sullivan, a woman said, her voice like ice. I've come for what's mine. In the dim light, he saw her face. It was Eleanor's face, but it was harder, colder, twisted with a rage that seemed to burn. This was not Eleanor Wilson. This was the woman from the wanted poster. This was Victoria. You're making a mistake, Caleb said, moving to shield Sophie with his body. There's a federal marshal in the house. Victoria laughed. One marshal against my men? No, Sullivan. You're the one who's made the mistake. Her eyes fell on Sophie. Well, one of her precious brats. Bring the child here. We'll see how much her mother is willing to pay to get her back. The woman you're looking for isn't here, Caleb said, his mind racing. Don't lie to me, Victoria shrieked. After she used my name in that bank job and ran off with all the money. The pieces clicked into place. 2 women who looked alike. One a criminal, one an innocent scapegoat. Enough talk, Victoria snarled, raising the rifle. Bring me the child or I shoot you where you stand. Caleb didn't hesitate. He drew his revolver and fired, the shot intentionally wide, forcing Victoria to dive for cover. He scooped up Sophie. Run! He yelled, setting her down. Run to the house. Go to your mother. The little girl darted away as Victoria started firing from behind a stack of hay bales. The wild stallion, terrified by the noise, began kicking at its stall. Caleb was pinned down. He was outgunned, and he was alone. A bullet splintered the wood next to his head. In the brief pause as Victoria reloaded, he made a desperate move. He threw open the stallion's stall. The wild horse exploded from the enclosure, a bolt of pure fury. It charged past Victoria's hiding place, scattering hay bales, and thundered out the open barn door into the storm. Caleb used the chaos to circle around her. He had his revolver aimed at her back. "Drop it," he commanded. "It's over." She turned slowly, hatred burning in her eyes. "You have no idea what you've done," she spat. "My men will kill every last one of you now." As if on cue, a fresh volley of gunfire erupted from the house. "You're making a mistake, Sullivan," Victoria said, her voice suddenly calm, almost conversational. "That woman in your house, she's the one who betrayed us all. Ask her what really happened in Denver." "I believe I can answer that question." Caleb spun around. Eleanor stood in the doorway to the house, holding a shotgun. Her face was pale, but her hands were steady. Her gray eyes were fixed on Victoria, filled with a cold fury he had never seen before. "Hello, Victoria," she said, her voice dripping with ice. "It's been a long time." The two women faced each other across the barn, mirror images of light and shadow. "You know her?" Caleb asked, his gun still trained on Victoria. "We met in Denver," Eleanor said, her eyes never leaving her double. "She told me her name was Lily. She befriended me, asked me about my journey, my children. I thought she was just being kind." Victoria let out a harsh, barking laugh. "Kind? I was setting you up, you fool. A grieving widow with 5 kids. You were the perfect scapegoat. Who would ever suspect you of robbing a bank? Except you never made it to Helena," Caleb realized aloud. "You disappeared." "A complication," Victoria sneered. "I had to use your name anyway. But my plan was to find you and eliminate the loose end." The casual way she spoke of murder sent a chill down Caleb's spine. A new wave of gunfire from the house, closer now, more desperate, shattered the tense standoff. "Your children are in danger," Victoria said with a smirk. "We need to end this now," Caleb said to Eleanor. "Go back to the house. I'll handle her." "No," Eleanor said, her voice firm. "You don't know what she's capable of." Caleb moved to tie Victoria up, but in a flash, she threw a handful of hay in his face and lunged for her rifle. Eleanor fired the shotgun. The blast was deafening. Victoria screamed, clutching her shoulder, and crashed against the stall door. Caleb had his revolver on her in an instant. She was wounded, but the fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. They bound her hands, ignoring her curses and threats. They moved back toward the house, into the chaos. The kitchen was destroyed. In the main room, Gabriel was in a desperate firefight, pinned down behind an overturned table. "4 of them inside," he yelled. "More trying to get in." "Get to the cellar," Caleb shouted to Eleanor. "I'll cover you and the marshal." As Eleanor disappeared down the hall, Caleb laid down a spray of covering fire. Gabriel made a break for it. An attacker rose up to shoot him in the back, but Caleb's shot was faster. The man dropped. They retreated to the pantry, to the heavy trap door that led to the root cellar. Caleb threw it open. Samuel was at the bottom of the stairs, shotgun at the ready. They scrambled down, bolting the door behind them, just as the attackers started trying to break it down. The cellar was dimly lit, packed with the entire Wilson family. Noah stood in front of his siblings, holding his father's revolver, his young face a grim mask of determination. Heavy footsteps stomped on the floorboards above them. They were trapped. "There's another way out," Samuel said, pointing to a dark opening in the far wall. "A tunnel leads to the barn." It was their only chance. But Victoria was in the barn, or had been, and the attackers were right above them. Just as they were about to enter the tunnel, the cellar door above them splintered. "Go!" Caleb yelled, firing 2 quick shots up through the opening to buy them a few seconds. He dove into the tunnel last, pulling the loose boards back into place behind him. The tunnel was dark, narrow and suffocating. Ahead he could see the bobbing light of a single lantern. The air was thick with dust. Sophie coughed, the sound echoing in the tight space. They emerged into the barn. It was empty. The blood stain was there, but Victoria was gone. She'd escaped. "We have to move," Caleb said, already saddling horses. "She knows about this tunnel. She'll tell her men." They were about to make a break for it, out into the raging blizzard, when Caleb froze. "Chapman," he said, "the deputy, he's still in the house." To go back for him was suicide. To leave him was a death sentence. "I'll go," Gabriel said. "No," Caleb countered. "I'll go. Get them to safety." He looked at Eleanor, a silent promise passing between them. She touched his cheek, her hand warm against his cold skin. "Be careful," she whispered. Just then, Samuel hissed from the door. "Ryder's coming." "Go now," Caleb ordered. "I'll create a diversion." As Gabriel and Samuel led the Wilsons out a back door and into the storm, Caleb grabbed a lantern. He climbed into the hayloft. The dry hay went up in an instant, a whoosh of flame and smoke. The fire would draw the attackers away, cover the family's escape. He scrambled back into the tunnel just as the barn became a raging inferno. He emerged back into the cellar. The house above was silent now, the attackers presumably drawn to the fire. He crept upstairs. The devastation was absolute. Furniture shattered, windows blown out, snow drifting across the floor. He found Chapman in the study, barely conscious, bleeding from a fresh gunshot wound, but alive. "Sullivan," the young man croaked, "thought you were dead." "Not yet," Caleb said, hauling him to his feet. "Let's go." They were almost to the cellar when a voice stopped them cold. "Going somewhere, Sullivan?" Victoria stood in the doorway. Her shoulder was crudely bandaged, but her eyes burned with a feverish hatred. In her good hand, she held a revolver. "My men will find them," she hissed. "But you won't live to see it." She raised the gun. "You care for her, don't you? The widow." Caleb's silence was his answer. "How touching," she sneered. "Goodbye, Sullivan. Give my regards to Lieutenant Wilson when you see him." The name hit Caleb. "You knew him," he said, the final terrible piece of the puzzle falling into place. "You were part of it. The Helena connection. The corruption ring he was investigating." Victoria's finger faltered on the trigger. "Clever man. Wilson was a fool. He paid the price." "You killed him," Caleb breathed, a cold fury rising in him. "The fever." It wasn't a fever. "Slow-acting poison," she confirmed with a chilling smile. "Untraceable." In that split second, as her attention wavered, Caleb charged. He slammed into her. The gun went off, the bullet flying wild. They crashed to the floor, struggling for the weapon. She was inhumanly strong, fighting like a cornered animal. The gun went off again, the sound deafening, muffled between their bodies. Victoria gasped. Her body went rigid, then limp. Caleb pushed himself away. A dark red stain was spreading across the front of her coat. "Sullivan," she whispered, her voice fading. "You don't understand. They'll never stop coming." And then she was gone. He had to get Chapman out. They stumbled through the tunnel and emerged into the blizzard. The barn was gone, just a smoking ruin. Their only hope was a small line cabin, 6 miles north, through the heart of the storm. The journey was a descent into a frozen, white hell. The blizzard was relentless. Chapman fell unconscious, a dead weight that Caleb refused to abandon. He was running on sheer will, his body numb, his mind a fog of pain and cold. Just when he thought he couldn't take another step, he saw it. A faint, golden light glowing through the snow. The cabin. The door swung open. Hands pulled him inside, into the warmth. He saw Noah's face, then Samuel's, then Gabriel's, and then Eleanor was there, her eyes shining with tears. "You made it," she whispered. "We'd almost given up hope." He tried to speak, to tell her everything, but the darkness finally claimed him. His last thought was of the promise he had made, a promise that was, at last, fulfilled. Caleb awoke a day later, his body screaming in protest. The storm had broken, and the world outside the small line cabin was silent, buried in snow. Eleanor sat by his side, her face etched with exhaustion and relief. He told them everything, about Victoria's confession, the poison, the Helena connection. The pieces of Robert Wilson's last days finally clicked into place. He knew. Eleanor whispered, tears welling in her eyes. He knew they were coming for him, and he never told me. He was protecting you, Caleb said. Just then, Noah spoke up. Father had a secret compartment, he said, in his saddle. It's back in Kansas City. Gabriel's eyes lit up. His evidence. It must be there. They were still weak, still trapped by the snow, but now they had a new mission. They had to get that saddle. They had to finish what Robert Wilson had started. They had to burn the Helena connection to the ground. 1 year later, spring had returned to Montana. The ranch house was rebuilt, bigger and stronger than before. The barn was new, the wood still smelling of pine. Caleb stood on the porch, watching Noah work with the wild stallion in the corral. The horse was still spirited, but its wildness was gone, replaced by a loyalty and trust that the boy had earned. The past year had been a whirlwind. With the evidence from Robert's saddle, Marshall Hayes had dismantled the Helena connection from the top down. Corrupt officials, powerful businessmen, all of them were brought to justice. Robert Wilson was hailed as a hero. Eleanor and the children had stayed. Pinewood Ranch was their home now. The quiet cabin was filled with the sound of laughter. It was filled with life. Eleanor came to stand beside him, her hand finding his. He would be so proud of Noah, she said softly. He'd be proud of all of you, Caleb replied. Are you happy, Caleb Sullivan? She asked, her gray eyes searching his. Happier than I ever thought possible, he said, and he meant it. Just then, the weekly stage appeared down the road, kicking up a cloud of spring dust. But it wasn't just the mail driver. There were passengers. 2 men in dark suits, looking official and out of place. They were from the Department of Justice in Washington. They had come to see Eleanor, to present her with a posthumous medal for her husband's service, and to deliver the news of a government pension that would secure her family's future. As the official spoke, Caleb stood back, watching the woman he loved and the children who had become his own. He had been a lonely man, waiting for a bride who never came. But fate, in its strange and winding way, had brought him something better. It had brought him a family. It had brought him home. And it had shown him that even after the worst storm, the sun will, eventually, shine again. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption on the frontier, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what we have coming next.